So I actually have no idea what a whammy is, but it does sound like it should be an award given in the Lustre community. So I did want to talk about the history of Lustre a little bit. So probably, if you're interested in Lustre, you're probably aware that DDN did recently acquire back in June the Lustre business and engineering team from Intel. And so over the years, there have been changes. From different organizations who've been the driving force behind what's going on with Lustre. And this is one of the things that's like a real advantage of having software that's distributed over a permissive open source license, because regardless of what happens with changes in executive strategy or acquisitions or whatever else, basically as long as there's people still interested in the software, there's a development community who can just pick up and move things along. So I think that's one of the real strengths of Lustre. So a bit of an update with the LTS releases. So the data we have is that these releases have been very popular. People really like having regular maintenance releases that support the latest Linux distributions. 2.10 came out as the first of these in July of last year, and we announced at the time that for at least 18 months we would stick with 2.10 as the LTS branch, and we would update a further release. So with those, we've had probably every few months we've had a new release come out, and we are expecting to have before the end of the year 2.10.6 release, which will support Red Hat 7.6. But we also did decide that we would switch in the new year to having the upcoming 2.12 release to be the next LTS release. So there'll be a little bit of an overlap there as a transition period, but certainly as the year wears on next year, we would expect that if a new version of Red Hat comes out or whatever else, that if you want to stick with that, then you would expect to move to the latest 2.12 to be able to do that. And so the major drivers there were support for new kernels. There's been a lot of changes, restructuring with the code, with the work we're doing with the upstream client, and there's definitely drivers behind that, as I'll touch a bit more on that later on. And also new features, in particular data on MDT. So that's a performance benefit for small file I/O, and that's definitely a feature that a lot of people have been asking about, and it's one of the major drivers behind us deciding to move. So 2.12, this is something that takes up a lot of my day-to-day time. I run the Lustre engineering group at the Cloud division at DDN. The standouts here, we are, with RHEL 7.6 just coming out, we did adjust the support matrix for the Linux distros there to reflect that. We're also, a lot of Lustre CFS users are very excited about the upcoming CFS 0.8 release, so we won't immediately switch to that when it comes out. It's still probably a couple of months away from coming out, but we have tested against the ZFS mainline to know that we will build and we can run. Those who want to be, early adopters will have that flexibility to do so. In terms of features with this release, DNE directory striping means as you add, expand and add extra MDTs, that you'll have a mechanism to be able to restripe to get the sort of performance benefits from that. LNet network health is, building on the multi-rail development where we had in 2.10, where you could have support multiple interfaces. LNet network health is more of rather than a performance issue, which was performance benefit, which was the focus early on with that work. This is more of a resiliency feature where if there's issues routing via one of the networks, it will instead retry on the alternative network to increase the prospects of things getting through. Lazy size and MDT is basically to provide an estimate. A quick, in cases where you need a quick result on the size of a file, not a very precise one, it gives a good enough estimate. So for something like a policy engine where you're making decisions based on groupings of files based on their size, just having a rough approximation is good enough. And so it's for that kind of thing. T10PI is basically allowing internet data checksums for hardware with the right kind of hooks. So that's basically the highlights of 2.12. Another innovation that's just we made a press release about this week is ARM. There's been a lot of buzz around ARM recently in HPC circles, and there was definitely strong attendance at the ARM on HPC event on Monday, and so we've taken steps to increase ease of use for Lustre on ARM. And so we have a continuous integration system for Lustre development where any proposed changes, get built, go through a regression, a functional regression test suite, get reviewed by, other peer engineers, and then get some stress testing done by the gatekeeper before releases are finally integrated. And so, key steps through that process, we have ARM nodes included, so we can be confident that, the binaries that end up on the download side are a first-class citizen compared to other architectures. So looking how things fit in the major, the grander scheme of things. So we have the, 2.12 release is just coming out before the end of the year, and then into next year we'll have a 2.13 release. There's some interesting developments lined up there, particularly I think persistent client cache is probably the pick of the bunch in 2.13. That's basically a feature which allows you to leverage, say, very fast, SSDs on a client. And we have some workloads like genomics workloads where you're doing a lot of work with small files, but it's very contained to the work on the same client until that work's committed, where it needs to be accessible by a broader range of clients. That's really the workload where persistent client cache is targeted. And then for 2.14, this was development that we had initially hoped to get in 2.13, but as we got further along, we've realized that's not feasible. And so that's, erasure coding there is, basically providing, providing resiliency in a more space-efficient way. And that's definitely from the Lustre BOF last year. That was, the standout feature people were very keen on. But, obviously this is complex stuff, so we need to make sure that the quality is there when we deliver the feature. Also, the IML is the management and monitoring tool. So some of you may know this. This has been around for a number of years. The software's been through a lot of generations, really through the mill in production environments. This was branded for a while as Intel Manager for Lustre. We have rebranded it as Integrated Manager for Lustre to sort of avoid any confusion, because Intel are not involved in the development of this anymore, but this is a tool that's used for the management and monitoring of Lustre, and we definitely see there to be great potential here into, while there's a number of options around for monitoring tools, management is not as there's not as many options, and we really think this is a growth area to really help with ease of use for Lustre. So that development work is continuing on that one. With Lustre in the upstream kernel, I did mention this fleeting earlier on. So you may have seen news. This is a typo. This was actually in the kernel staging area in the 3.11 release, and so this was, to be honest, this was added to the staging area kind of prematurely, without sort of broad community consensus. It then became a very difficult situation to operate within the restrictions imposed by the staging area with, good reason, but instead we've had a strategic withdrawal, and that work is still continuing. Neil Brown from SUSE, who's obviously who's very well respected in kernel circles, is hosting that tree, and there's James Simmons from Oak Ridge as well is very active in that. There's other players involved as well to a lesser degree, but those are the two who are mostly driving this initiative. And the hope is that when that work, we really consider it to be ready to go, we will reapproach the kernel.org folk to get upstreamed. And then on a somewhat related note, we do the original, the LDiscFS version of Lustre is based on ext4. We had some patches that were, where we deviated there. We have been working with getting some of those larger features upstreamed into the ext4 in the upstream kernel, and those are being used by Google and others now. And so that makes things much easier for us to stay more current with the new versions of E2FS progs as they come up to make the Lustre specific versions. So that's good news for people who are running Lustre on the LDiscFS. Then I did want to promote the Lustre users group. Obviously a big event like this, every single HPC technology under the sun is being discussed here this week. This is an event that's just specifically focusing on Lustre. It happens every year. And since OpenSFS has been organizing this, we've had member organizations have been hosting the event, which makes for a very interesting event. And this year it's been hosted by the University of Houston, so we'll be back in Texas in the new year, and there'll be several days of just entirely focused discussion and around the Lustre file system. So definitely reserve those dates in your diary if you're interested in doing this. So this is just highlights of some of the Lustre activities going on round and about this this week. Unfortunately, we're about halfway through this, so some of these, I'm afraid you've missed the boat already. But Andreas Dilger, who is one of the founding engineers of Lustre file system and our CTO of the WAM Cloud division, he will be participating in the Analyzing Parallel I/O BOF a bit later today, so that could be interesting to go along and hear some different perspectives there. We do have a couple of demos tomorrow in the Stanford booth, one about Lustre on Google Cloud and one a demo of IML, so if you're interested in those, come along. And it may not be me actually but presenting this, it may actually be somebody else, but we're also presenting in the About Lustre on Google in the Google booth tomorrow. And then finally tomorrow it is me definitely presenting the SUSE booth about some the activities which we're involved in with SUSE. So that's what I have in my whistle stop Lustre tour. If anyone has questions for me,